A little fun fact before we start. The wonderful presenter right here, the MC, actually, he was doing a demo about Cloudflare workers just in Berlin a couple of months ago. And that's where I met him for the first time. So it's kind of fun that now I am here presenting a similar topic, but mixed up in a different way, but still born out of Cloudflare workers. So a little bit of the goals for today. There are lots of misconceptions about the edge environments and about things that may or may not work as you expect. But also there's plenty of potential opportunities. And I want to share a few of those with you. We are kind of used to serverless, like AWS Lambda got pretty big, and we all got used to it. And Cloudflare workers and similar edge platforms, they build on top of it. They make it better in some ways, not always. But the cool thing is that they give us instant gratification. Like we use tools that allow us to ship a project right away and see it spinning in global regions all over the world. And finally, I want to show you how to mix React in the middle, right? How to create full stack applications with all of this. So a little bit about me. I'm Alberto Schiabel from Venice, Italy. You can find me online at jcomino. I work for Prisma. I'm also a contractor, and I mostly deal at the frontier of Rust, WebAssembly, TypeScript, and Node.js. So, how many of you have heard of Cloudflare workers before? All right, a few people, so maybe I'm gonna be a little bit fast here. All right, so what is Cloudflare? Well, it was born as a CDN, which is essentially an HTTP cache. Now they have 300 and something data centers in the world. They are so fast they're pretty much fast to any corporate network. I think they have something like 13,000 corporate network, which means they are the first ones to reach the major hubs for all the bytes that are stripped and shipped around the network. So if you wanna get ship your applications to users, the fastest way is to use their CDN pretty much. And they had this idea. What if, rather than having just a CDN cache, we added a little bit of functionality on top of it, like a little bit of customization? What if we allowed users to define their own custom logic? And I know you want to write custom code for your own logic, right? So what did they do? All right. They created Cloudflare workers back in 2017. They were fairly obscure since probably 2 years ago, when they eventually started to become gradually more popular. And how they work is basically they hooked into their already existing network, and they try to add functionality on top. They add storage computation on top. They add CPU processing and allow you to customize everything incoming from a request and all the life cycles around it. You can, for instance, split more requests into several sub-requests, contacting serverless databases all over the place, aggregating data in memory, returning to the user, maybe stream it back to the user. And of course, you could support web apps with dynamic content that we're gonna see at the end. And how do you program them? Well, you need to write JavaScript. Why is that? Well, first of all, JavaScript is ubiquitous. Like everybody knows JavaScript pretty much. And V8 was like the best sandbox engine, or like the most analyzed and most scrutinized engine in the world, and they didn't want to rebuild something from scratch, so they wanted to take the state of the art, for security purposes, etc. And why did they not take Node.js? Because Node.js was not meant to be a sandbox. Node.js is meant to be a platform for users, and you can spin it up with a container, you can spin it up with a child process, etc. But you have kind of a big overhead here. If you are a company who wants to profit off of workers, offering unit of computations to users and sharing some of them, splitting some of them, and distributing them around, it's going to be very cost inefficient if you use Node.js. And that's why they use this concept of V8 isolates. It's pretty cool if you check it out. This also has some implications. Like, we've always spent time throughout the past 7-8 years or so writing JavaScript for backend, thinking that the only JavaScript runtime was Node.js. Well, that's really no longer the case. I'm going to be closer here because the clicker doesn't really work much. Oh, a little bit mention about Cloudflare Pages. They just merged GitHub sites, Cloudflare sites with Cloudflare workers, and it's kind of similar to what now.sh was, plus a server infrastructure for it. So that's what we're gonna really use at the end. And what is their runtime for JavaScript? They created this workerd, and they recently open sourced it, I think 2 years ago. So you can even self-host your own Cloudflare workers, and you have a little bit of tools sit around it, right? You have Wrangler, the CLI tool. You have Miniflare to locally execute tests, and your developer environment for Cloudflare workers, because you don't want to always reach to a production setting. They're even putting an effort, they're spending money, energies, resources into trying to align APIs across the major JavaScript runtime providers, like Node.js, Dino, and so on. All right, that was a little bit of an insight about Cloudflare workers. Now a little bit of a heads up for Neon, which is essentially serverless Postgres with so many features baked in. Like you have distributed storage out of the box. It's auto-scalable, and if no user contacts your database in like 5 minutes, it automatically shuts down, and it just waits for a new request to come in, and just like Lambdas pretty much, but just for Postgres. It's a substitute for AWS Aurora, actually. It's becoming gradually more available in AWS regions. So yeah, it is hosted on AWS, but it just so happens that AWS is one of those ISP providers that is very tightly connected to the Cloudflare CDN. So any request coming from a Cloudflare worker will immediately reach an AWS region. So that's something to keep in mind. It also supports things like Git branching. It allows you to experiment with your data without risking breaking production. So that's pretty nice. And of course, they have their own JavaScript client. It's a little bit odd, perhaps. Like it requires you to set up a WebSocket connection. But beyond that, it's kind of the same style for a JavaScript driver API you would expect from downloading from a PM. And what about Remix? How many of you have used Remix for building web apps with React before? All right, very few people. And how many Next.js? Okay, I mean, the title of this conference, yeah, it makes sense. How many of you remember React Router? Okay. What if I told you that Remix is pretty much React Router? So it was built essentially by the same guy and group of people. And they just created some opinionated framework, which is, has different opinion than Next.js. It tries to be also more compatible with web APIs in general, rather than being, Next.js was mostly Node.js oriented until very recently. And that had a series of issues, especially it was pretty hard to deploy outside of Vercel for some reasons. And how does it look like? Well, first of all, one important concept of both React Router and Remix itself is the concept of navigation levels and the concept of like nested routes. So let's imagine this. This is like a software as a service. You see here at the top, you might see the URL like examples/sales/invoices/an ID. And let's say, okay, that's fantastic. So initially, let's imagine that we are asking information about the current user, right? We want to know what is the email of the user, like some account information, so we can load the proper data for them. And what happens if we, the idea is that the top level, the root of the tree kind of commands and regulates the nested routes that will show up. So if we take a look at the nested one, the first nesting level, sales, what do? We perform some other query, like we got the sales for that user, and if we click somewhere, we might get the, all right, we might get the invoices. And the idea, as you may see or may imagine, The idea is that every time you click somewhere, you add another level to the URL, and you also go one level deeper and in a more specific frame of the web application. And that's common for several, I would say, those boring applications that somehow make a lot of money. Maybe the ones that are not that fancy to write, but also that provide you for a living. And Remix was made especially for that use case. Initially, it was closed source. You had to pay for it. And then Shopify acquired them. And they were able to basically survive without making other users pay for it. So now it's open source. Anybody can contribute. They have so many videos on YouTube explaining in like 5 minutes how to do pretty much any operation you might think about. So in terms of documentation, both written and tutorial based, that's quite neat. And the cool part is this is quite different than the waterfall model that React.js and Next.js offers. Because usually, if you define a get server-side props or a similar method for getting data before rendering the component, in Next.js, you will have a bunch of spinners, right? You have a spinner at the top level, and then once it resolves, you render something at an nested level, and that has a loading spinner and until it resolves something. Whereas in Remix, all of these requests are loaded in parallel on the server. So here I'm talking about server-side rendering. And what are like the two main directives for dealing with data? First one is just action. It's a server it only runs on the server side. And what it does, it reacts to non-GET HTTP requests coming from a form. So you don't need fancy form libraries. You just need HTTP, essentially, and that form imported from Remix around React is just a wrapper around a plain HTML form. You have a button, you submit the event. You don't need any onSubmit callback here. What happens is just you have a request to that action. Action just needs to be defined with that name, exported, and essentially it's gonna be translated in an HTTP post request by default to the same route that you are in currently in the UI. You can perform any type of async operation. However, you need to be aware that that is a blocking operation. So whatever you do, try to do it fast. In this case, we're just reading the form data, the body retrieved from the form. We're retrieving the CT input value, and we're just returning it to the user as JSON. And on the client side, right? How do we retrieve that? With a hook, with a React hook called use action data. And the type inference is quite, it's pretty good in Remix, I have to be honest, compared to my experience with Next a couple of years ago, if that's something relevant. Also, a little bit of a disclaimer here. I haven't really been working on front-end for a long time. Just revised it for like in the past year. So I might be a little bit biased, but I'm gonna leave it for later for the questions. What if you need to load data before rendering a component? That's what the loader API is about. Before getting further, I wanted to highlight something at the top. You see, we are importing at the third line. We are importing from Remix run/Cloudflare. What it tells us is that Remix provides abstractions, and then you have concrete implementations depending on the target JavaScript runtime. So rather than making assumptions of where you're going to run, you have to be quite explicit about the runtime in order to have the best functionality and also best performance for it, and more adaptability. So we said before, basically they have the same API. It just so happens that this loads after the action. Moreover, this only reacts to GET requests. And again, it's blocking by default, so it blocks the rendering on the client side. However, if you need to return data and you don't really know how much data you want to, you expect, or if you expect a list of several items, maybe it's just better to return a stream to the user. And how do you do that? Well, you just define a promise, query in this case. You don't await it, you just define it. So you just schedule, you prepare the work to do. And then you defer that promise using that defer API provided. I guess I didn't import it. Yeah, it will be the third line rather than JSON. It will be defer from Remix around Cloudflare. and then you load it in. Similarly, with that use loader data hook, I really appreciate this consistency by the Remix design around APIs. And if you want, you may also have client-side variations of it. Those are more experimental and more recent. And how does Prisma look like in the mix? How many of you have used Prisma before? All right, about half. For those of you who may not know, it's just an open source, type-safe database toolkit that tries to do a lot of things. And I think the most important part of it is it tries for you not to shoot yourself in the foot. Like, we don't want you to do something with the database that may harm your processes because you are deleting something you are not supposed to, that you are forgetting indexes that would be very beneficial for your query. And also, we want to help users who may not be well-versed in SQL, right? Because there are so many tools to know about to write full-stack applications, and if we can get rid of some of the complexity, maybe that it can be good for many people. And what's the idea? You just describe your schema model for the database in a file at the top here. So like you have a city that will be translated into a create table city. You have an ID, like a primary key. You have a name field, which is just a var text. It would have a unique index applied to that, and it could be related to a certain model, which is not shown here for space reasons. And then you will have a TypeScript. Essentially, this is what the users will use. They will just have this Prisma client thingy. They will instantiate the class, and you will magically find accessors and methods to query data, access, modify, upsert, delete rows with filters that you can apply. And all of that is type safe. If you hit like Command Ask on your MacBook, you will find your editor will show you all the things that you can do. What's the catch here? So the question could be, does Prisma currently work in the Cloudflare workers ecosystem? Or like, was it made for that scenario? Not really, because when Prisma was built, those things did not exist. So a little bit of a highlight about how it works. It's just two main components, right? You have the TypeScript facade, and you have all the accessor methods and these APIs that you use directly. And then there's all the complexity hidden in a Rust code base that's compiled into a library, and that library is loaded via the Node API modules, basically native modules that are initialized at runtime. What's the problem? Cloudflare workers are not Node.js. And in particular, they forbid pretty much everything that has to do with arbitrary code execution, performing system calls to have this connection to native bindings. So we were pretty much left without any option. Thankfully, there is one option offered by the V8, which is the basically the JavaScript engine that Google Chrome uses under the hood. It is not just a JavaScript engine, it is also a WebAssembly virtual machine. And how many of you use WebAssembly, or at least heard about it? Okay, it's just a tool, essentially a way for you to take some native code, you compile it in a way that is understandable by JavaScript, and you make it interoperate with JavaScript. And you compile it only once and run it everywhere. Have you ever heard this slogan before? Yeah, but in a different scenario, I guess. So yeah, that's basically, we had to do a major rewrite, and it's currently in early access, so it's not available for everyone, but I wanted to show you how it will look like. All right, so if you please take your phone out and scan the QR code, or you go to Kongres, Congress-Next.js-2024.pages.dev. I'm gonna wait a little bit. This is just a quiz survey application to make things a little bit fun and interactive. So I'm gonna move here. Right. So we can hit join survey. And you can decide what is your favorite Polish city. Let's see. You didn't see anything. All right. Once you've done that, you go back, you go to view results. Okay, so we have a bunch of people here. All of this is happening in real time. The database behind it is Neon, of course, and we can actually see that because I have a Neon console right here. You might need to see it a bit better. And if I run this, I have similar results. Of course, some more people have clicked while I was scrolling there. Oops. And how does it look like? Well, let me just grab the code base very, very quick. We have this, let's take a look at the package.json. This is just, I took the Cloudflare Pages template from the Remix examples, and the one good thing about Remix is they have like dozens and dozens of examples for different configurations and different deployment platforms that you may target. So they already set up all the tooling for using Cloudflare Pages for me. All I had to do was install the libraries I needed, twinkle a little bit with the bundling system, because using WebAssembly with ES build and making it available for every JavaScript runtime is a little bit of a pain. But beyond that, it just runs. I can show you that locally as well around pm dev, so you can see the local experience of Cloudflare. Because basically the aim is to convince you to try these new fancy tools, and if the developer experience is worth it, then maybe you're gonna use it, but if it sucks, maybe not. So I already run pm dev. You see here, it told me that it's ready. It shows, it detects some environment variables, right? That's the environment variable connected to Neon. And here I can just do whatever, and I'm still connected to the main Neon database. Of course, I could have used the branching features of Neon to do things fancy. I just didn't really bother. There are some catches. How many of you have a .env file in your code base? Okay, that's a lot. Cloudflare Workers really doesn't want that. You're not gonna, if you define your variables in there, they're not gonna be picked up by Wrangler or by Cloudflare in production. They expect you to have something called like a .dev.vars, and it's a little bit of a pain unless you create a little bit of an abstraction around it. So for instance, if I want to, let's say I want to clear out the database, so I can run Prisma DB seed, but I need to make the environment variable available to Prisma. So I can just prefix something like that, ppm run env, run it. Yes, and it run. And for those of you who have never used that before, there will be essentially running this seed TypeScript file. You can delete tables you don't really need anymore, like delete the rows of the table, maintaining the table schema definition. You can create some cities, like here if I wanted to change cities here, like let's put, I don't know, a little change, maybe. Okay, I saved this, and then I run the bsid. Okay, and it should already be available if you go back to these ones. Join survey, maybe I need to refresh. Has it picked it up yet? Yes, Venice is here. Oh yeah, I remember that because I used a static, so if you go to view results, that's fantastic, that's what I wanted to see. That's what happens when in one route of the application you have a static definition, and in the other route you have a dynamic definition, and somehow the IDs don't match. But that's cool, that's cool. I just wanted to show you that you can play around with things. And by the way, the code, there is a link at the bottom here. So if you click that, you will find the repository with some instructions about how to run it on your own. Like you can see how things are set up. If you have questions about anything, you can just reach out on Twitter, for instance, or you can open a GitHub issue. I take a look at them every once in a while. I wanted to finish my presentation with a couple of takeaways from this. So I wanted to showcase how you can create interactive applications with a modern React framework and deploy that in a platform that is not really vendored, like that is not strictly tied to the framework you're using. You're not tied to any particular database, you're not really tied to any particular technology. Like if you want to swap out Neon and use PlanetScale, you can do that. You can apply the same concepts you heard about here. You can still retain the serverless oriented architecture, but in an edge environment, and it will still probably work for your use cases. You may not always prefer a serverless. Like for instance, Neon, that's great. If you want to start a project, if you fit into the free tier, that's awesome. If you grow and hopefully you have some revenue coming in, please give them some money. But be aware that if you need your database to be available all the time, then the serverless use case is probably not for you. And you're gonna pay a lot more money than you will do if you use just a EC2 instance or like something similar with that database running all the time. Cloudflare Workers is probably the cheapest application to run software on. You have something like 100,000 requests per day for free. Every request can take up to 10 milliseconds of CPU time, but also you have an unbound I/O time. So if you need to connect to a database that is very far, you're not really gonna pay for that. And if you just pay like €5 per month, you're gonna have like 10 million requests per month. And every additional million is gonna be just 30 cents. So I dare you to find the cheapest alternative around. I don't know whether they are really getting money from it or whether it's just a marketing tactic, but it's pretty comfortable for us developers. One caveat, the deployment unit is very, very small. So you can't deploy projects that after bundling and after gzip are larger than 1 megabyte unless you give them money. And a little bit about Remix as well, my thoughts, my reasoning about it. I tried using Next.js at least 3 times, and I tried deploying it in platforms different than Vercel. In some cases, with Next.js templates and the documentation around, I was not really able to. Even by looking at tweets, even by looking at Stack Overflow or Discord, I was not really able to. With Remix, I followed the first link I Googled. I just followed the steps, and I was able to deploy it right away. So maybe that's a little bit of an experience in case you're looking for something that's easy to use, maintain, and also the people behind it have been working in the React ecosystem very, very long. About the bundlers, how many of you have had problems while developing locally with Next.js? Because sometimes the developer server either goes out of sync, or sometimes it just crashes without you really realizing why it does that. I think it was more frequent 1.5 years ago, and I think it was mostly due to Webpack being used under the hood. Now I know they have been they are upgrading to TurboPack, something like that, like a Rust bundler, but it's still very experimental, and they only use that in development mode. So when you are developing, when you are bundling Next.js applications on Vercel, for instance, for production use cases, you're still using another bundler. So sometimes things can not necessarily be consistent or how you would expect. Whereas Remix uses the ES build that usually doesn't really have much problems. It's not that popular though, Remix. So if you want to create your the main application for your company, you may struggle to find people that have experience with it. You may struggle to find people who already have some competency with it. So that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're a CTO, if you're a hiring person. And about Prisma, it's been around for a while. It's been growing. We've been adding features. But admittedly, it was not really thought for this use case. And what we're doing is just ensuring that we are able to support this. First, personally, I love this environment, this evolution of the cloud. I really think it's going to be the next big thing in tech. Actually, I think it is already that. So we're really putting lots of efforts in there. And to conclude, I encourage you to take a read about Data Developer Experience Manifesto in case you are curious about all things related to databases. This is datadx.io. All things related to databases, all things related to data-driven applications, and in general, anything that you can build, streaming data around, parsing, filtering. It unlocks lots of opportunities. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.